Today, we will talk about the work of a watercolorist you have surely heard of, as he is world-renowned in the field of landscape watercolor. I am referring, of course, to Alvaro Castagnet. He is a reference for many artists, as he has achieved great fluency and mastery in the use of watercolor. He conducts workshops and classes around the world, in addition to having received recognition and won numerous awards. Well, in this video, we are going to take a brief tour of his work and analyze the elements that make up his artworks, looking at the aspects that shape his particular style. But well, before we start, in case you don't know me, I am Claudia Lovera, and on this channel you will learn everything related to landscape in watercolor, always in an original and dynamic way. So don't hesitate to like my videos and subscribe. Let's go, intro. Alvaro was born in Montevideo, Uruguay, and from a very young age he was already passionate about painting and drawing, and since he was lucky that his father admired art, he always supported him by enrolling him in good academies such as the National School of Art in Montevideo, and later the University of Fine Arts. In the year 1983, which is precisely the year I was born, he moved to live in Australia and stayed there for 20 years, but he now lives again in Montevideo with his wife, and it is where he has his main studio. Well, having made this introduction, the first aspect I want to discuss in analyzing an artist's work is the themes or motifs that he usually paints. Primarily, in Alvaro's work, we will always see the urban landscape, as he loves the hustle and bustle of the cities, the people, the lights, the sounds. Come on! He feels more at home in places like New York than in peaceful little towns on the coast or in the countryside. Themes that he has indeed painted on some occasions. Now let's see how Alvaro works with color. You will see he uses all the resources in a very expressive and dynamic way, and color was no exception. He uses it in a very intelligent way and in certain works, even in an exaggerated manner to ensure that we focus our attention where he wants. For example, in this work that you see now on screen, he has opted for a blue, very striking and pure, which becomes very electric in the shadow area of the building and leads us to focus on that part of the work. It is not usual for Alvaro to work with such pure blues in this way and in such large areas, and for this reason, this work surprises me quite a bit. You will see that he usually leans more towards warm colors in large areas and not cool ones, like in this case. Look, this work that you see now is an extreme case of what I was telling you, because here the artist has chosen to do the entire night scene with warm colors, except for a bit of blue and purple in some smaller, more contrasted areas. The rest is dominated by the yellow-orange of the artificial lights and the vibrant reds of the awnings and walls of the cafes, which reflect and extend across the entire floor. Here, in this other one, you have a very similar example in which we practically only see this intense red that dominates the work and is also reflected on the ground, in the entire coffee area as well, and even in the faces of the people. The whole area on the left is actually anecdotal. The artist has used it to provide some context for this scene in Paris, with some distant buildings and a couple of cars. But notice that the shadow areas in this part are also leaning towards reddish tones. It is already evident that Alvaro loves to use alizarin crimson and pyrrole orange. This work is also very interesting because of everything we are seeing, but in this case, color plays an important role in the composition as well. As you can see, we have two areas clearly divided by color. In the upper area, a little less than half towards the top, we have the grays, where he mainly plays with neutral ink. And in the lower area, all our attention is drawn to the yellow and orange of the taxis. You will see, this intelligent use of color can also be seen in a similar way in this work, although it is less noticeable since the color is not as contrasted and defined. But if you pay attention, you can see the same effect of treating the distant background of the buildings in a very neutral and hazy way, while the main subject, which consists of the boats and the three men on the right, has more detail and vibrant colors to draw our gaze to them. In this way, the artist manages to focus our attention where he wants, through color. Moreover, in this case, I don't know if Alvaro did it on purpose, but for the main subject, which is the boat on the right with the three men, he used red and yellow colors, which are also his favorites and stand out the most. In contrast, for the boat on the left, he has chosen the color blue, which is a bit more understated. So it's amazing, really. A very good use of color in this painting, I love it. Later, I will comment on another aspect of this work, but since we are talking about color, let's discuss the works that do not have it. Look, these two works are completely monochromatic except for some very specific small brushstrokes of red, as we can see in the image on the left. And in the one on the right, in addition to some reds, there are also a few blue strokes for the people's clothing and the umbrellas. Of course, all of this gives us an impressive dramatic effect. Here, color plays an important but more secondary role. Let's say it gives a final and more interesting finish to the work. But, really, being monochrome, what stands out and what is played with are the more marked and exaggerated contrasts of light and shadow. And now that we are talking about contrast, let's look at the lights. Well, to address the topic of light, I wanted to start with this work to see in detail all the potential that Alvaro expresses with his mastery of light. In most of his works, we can see a great effort with the contrasts of light and shadow, and in this piece, I believe they are taken to the highest level. As here, the shadows of the sunset projected by the passers-by and the cars create such drama that they are clearly at their peak. Protagonists. It is that, even with how expressive Alvaro is, I believe he has let himself be carried away by passion here, since, if you notice, he has even projected the rear lights of the two cars as if they were shadows. I would say that this is a clear example of how what some might consider a failure of representation plays a super important role here and contributes to the drama and expressiveness. It is evident that it is done on purpose and it is really effective. It's as if he wanted to represent the movement created by the traces of light that are perceived when taking photographs with a long exposure time. And well, regarding the colors, they are very well chosen. We have the orange of the sunlight, the red of the awnings and the lights, which couldn't be missing, and a very beautiful bluish purple for the shadows. Look at this other one, which is also a kind of monochrome like the ones I showed you before, but this time with blue touches and light once again as the main protagonist, just as we have seen in the previous work. The truth is that these elongated sunset shadows always add a lot of play and interest to a work. It's incredible. You will see. I am showing you the next work so you can see how light, just like we have seen with color, can also play a key role in the composition of the work. This is a work very particular, in which we clearly see how the line of the shadow separates the work into two parts diagonally. Let's say it is at the same time a division of color and light. In the upper right, we have light, fully represented by an ochre yellow color, and in the lower left, we have shadow, represented entirely by a transition of red, lilac, and bluish tones. This work is incredible in its simplicity but effectiveness. The truth is, yes, right? In this work that you see now, I wanted to mention that I also love how he has worked with light. Here, the protagonist for me is the light itself in its pure state, as it has been worked on as if it were a photograph with overexposure. That is to say, as if too much light had passed through the camera's diaphragm, since there are areas of light that almost appear whitish, having lost details and contrasts. Look at the sky, for example. The area with the most light on the right is almost white. And look at the buildings on the far left and the area of the ground. It's practically all light and without details of windows or people. Only a few shadows, slightly marked, but few. Let's say that this whole effect of overexposed light surrounds the entire central area of the work, which is where our gaze ultimately goes and where we can appreciate the details of the central building, the people, and other contrasts. Look at this other piece, on the other hand, in which we see that it does quite the opposite of what we are talking about. In this image of Cadaqués in Catalonia, there is practically no contrast. The fact that all the buildings are white also contributes to an effect of overexposure throughout the work. We only have some contrast in the area on the left of the boats. And look at this other one now. It denotes great mastery and artistic intelligence, maximum light ray at the bottom. A diamond of maximum shadow at the top, the rest a neutral area, and these three lanterns that from above and jumping from one to another lead us to the two main characters. Nothing more to say, a masterpiece of composition. Here, on the other hand, after having seen everything before, we are surprised to see how, instead of light, I would say there is atmosphere. In this view of Venice, warm colors predominate, with red as the main focus on the right. Here, everything is color and atmosphere, and there is practically no dramatic shadow. This is a completely different approach to the work, but it is also very valid and harmonious. Well, let's move on to discuss stroke and texture, starting with this piece. You will see, due to his expressiveness and quick capture of scenes, Alvaro always leaves us with many broad areas for our own interpretation. It suggests that we deduce what is there without giving unnecessary details. This translates into broad areas where what we will see is material, meaning the wide possibilities in terms of texture that watercolor offers us. Well, look at this beautiful cafe interior. Notice the capacity for synthesis that has been used in the lower right area. Our brain interprets that there is a bar, stools, and the floor. But in reality, if we look closely, it is just a diluted gray, some white and black dots, which are the stools, and some red touches that are part of the floor. Also, look at the area in the lower left. Here, he has achieved a great synthesis of the reflection of light on the table and also the reflections of some small areas in the background. He only had to leave the lower wash uncovered and approach the rest of the dark areas with dry paper. In addition, the curtains in the background are beautiful, with a very diluted and blurred texture. And if you pay attention to the color, it harmonizes with the cutout silhouette of the characters in the background, which also achieves a masterful backlighting effect, and all with a single color. In fact, only the man in the background to the left has a bit more nuance in color and some shadow on his clothing. Let's look at more works. This view of Madrid is a clear example to see that if we want to synthesize and play with textures and diluted mixtures as a final finish, the best place to do it is in the shadow areas, as these are places where we do not need to mark so much definition. In this case, we see how the silhouette of two men in the foreground merges into the darkness, and we only perceive strokes and diluted color. The blue of the car also flows, dripping downwards. Even in the buildings on the right, we can see how they have been worked with more blurred effects and only with some dry brush strokes for certain finishing details. One can appreciate regarding the details of the light areas that Alvaro usually works them with very dry, loose, and expressive brush strokes. These brush strokes often end up revealing the texture of the paper, an effect that I love. If you look at all the brush strokes of the Metropolis building, you can appreciate this stroke. Look. In this view of the city of Prague, the same thing happens as I am telling you. Dry and dragged brushstrokes in the bright areas of the buildings are more diluted and blurry in the shadowy areas. Pay attention to the texture of the ground. In this case, Alvaro has used a technique that I personally love, which is to splash drops of water with his hand or with the brush at the exact moment when the paint is drying. But the paper is not completely dry yet. And so the marked drops remain in the painting. And observe one last detail of this watercolor. It is fascinating the movement that he achieves with the cyclists, just with a few blurred and elongated strokes. They really create a lot of expressiveness. This other one is also a sketch from Prague where we can appreciate a bit of everything we have been discussing. Blurred dark areas, the work of light, the dripping of red color from the car. As you can see, dry brush strokes like, for example, on the legs of the pedestrian on the left. Look, this other one is a very good example of textures in the darkness. It is clearly appreciated in the buildings in the background and in those in the foreground. In addition to a work of light, he has curated a very particular viewpoint of the city. Here, you can also take a closer look at the use of aerial or atmospheric perspective, which gives us the sensation of depth in the more distant objects, treating them in a more nebulous way, with pale and blue colors, as can be seen in the upper part of this work. This creates the effect of space that makes distant objects appear less distinguishable. Take a look at this work from Venice. The effect of aerial perspective is also greatly appreciated here. The buildings in the background are completely blurred in the distance, and as they come closer, they become more defined. Allow me to return once again to this work that I have been talking about before, just to see the textures of the boats and their shadows. They are truly spectacular. The dripping, the splashes, the soft edges, the colors, the shape of the large central shadow. I love it. And finally, I leave you on screen to see some of the compositional structures used by Alvaro Castagnet, which are quite varied and original in addition to appreciating the artist's compositional work, it can also serve as inspiration for you when approaching a piece. Well, I hope you all have a great weekend. And don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel. See you soon. Say hi. Shira, say hi. Beautiful. The most beautiful cat in Barcelona.